welcome to our public lecture and book lunch. It is good to have all of you, and thanks for honoring our invitation. You all know why we are here, to have a public lecture, and it's one of the platforms which UPSA uses to bring prominent or experts in their field to talk about pertinent subjects that confront our nation. And by this gathering, we find solutions to those issues. The Vice-Chancellor of the University of Professional Studies, Professor Abednego Mpedi, is hosting the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, who is the speaker for today's public lecture. We warmly welcome all of you to this morning's public lecture. I will kickstart the program by inviting Reverend Theophilus Tete, the University Chaplain, to usher and us into prayer. Let's welcome him.
Shall we please rise for a word of prayer? Our Heavenly Father, this morning we are grateful. We thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for making it possible for us to assemble this morning for this book launch, public lecture. I pray that your Spirit will lead us, and that everything will go well. At the end of it, we'll give you all the praise and the glory. We thank you in the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much, Reverend. We would like to welcome the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Professional Studies, Accra, Professor Abednego Mpedi, to give us the welcome address. Let's welcome him with a clap.
Good morning. Oh, I said good morning. UPS sister, when we greet, we respond, good morning. The Chairman of Council, Dr. Kofi Konedu, members of the Judiciary, Ghana Bar Association, and Medical Associations present, members of the university community, our friends and reporters, my dear students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest and brother, Professor Letlhokwa George Mpedi, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. We are honored to host him on this momentous occasion as he delivers this public lecture on the theme, Artificial Reproductive Technologies, Ethical and Legal Considerations through an African Prism. We are proud that he chose UPSA to host the launch of his book as well, and we say, Sawubona. This event holds great importance for our academic community as it brings together scholars, experts, and distinguished personalities in the fields of law, medicine, justice, and labor and employment. We are privileged to have in our midst today the Employment Minister, who should join us shortly, who is supposed to preside over this book launch. We deeply appreciate everyone's presence and support. Professor Mpedi's expertise, coupled with his profound understanding of the realm of artificial Reproductive Technologies, with particular reference to the ethical and legal considerations within an African context, promises an enlightening and thought-provoking lecture. We eagerly anticipate his insights, which will undoubtedly contribute to our understanding of this complex and evolving field. Today's gathering is enhanced by the launch of Prof Mpedi's latest book titled Labor Laws in Ghana. We must applaud him as a South African for his investment of time into the development of such an important book on the labor laws of Ghana. Law is never a straight line and is to be highly commended for his dedication and commitment to labor laws that extends beyond the shores of his native South Africa. We have no doubt that this book will shed a bright light on the intricacies of labor laws within our beloved nation. I also consider this book is a valuable resource that will serve as a guide and reference for students, researchers, and professionals alike, and we express our gratitude for its invaluable contribution. As an institution dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, we firmly believe in the power of intellectual discourse and exchange. This event provides a unique opportunity for us to engage in discussions that transcend boundaries and delve into the nuances of artificial reproductive technologies from an African standpoint. Through this exploration, we can address the ethical, legal, and societal implications that arise and work together to shape a better future for our continent. To Professor Mpedi, we extend our deepest gratitude for the honor. Your distinguished career and scholarly accomplishments have made a lasting impact, and we are privileged to have you share your expertise with us today. To the Honorable Minister of Employment and Labor Relations that we expect today, thank you so much. To our students, I encourage you to seize this opportunity to engage, learn, and grow. Events like these provide a platform for intellectual development and understanding. Your participation in discussions and your pursuit of knowledge will shape your future and contribute to the progress of society. On behalf of the Governing Council, management, and entire UPSC community, I extend a warm welcome to you all. May your time spent here today be a catalyst for meaningful dialogue, knowledge sharing, and transformative change. Thank you.
We can do better than we did. Let's clap for. We will have the University Choir give us a medley of songs before the speaker is introduced. introduce the speaker for today. Is the Dean of the UPSA Law School, Professor Kofi Aboti. Let's welcome him.
The Chairman of Council, the Vice-Chancellor, dignitaries present, academics and managers of sister institutions, deans, HODs, faculty, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker for today is eminently qualified to speak to the subject. Professor Letlhokwa George Mpedi completed his B. Juris degree in 1996 and LLB degree in 1998 at Vista University. In 2001, the LLM degree in labor law was conferred upon him by the then Rand Afrikaans University, now University of Johannesburg. Upon completing his LLB, he was a junior lecturer in the Department of Mercantile Law at Vista University, Mamelodi campus. He joined the Center for International and Comparative Law and Social Security Law, CICLAS, at the then Rand Afrikaans University as a researcher in 2000. In August 2003, Professor Mpedi accepted a position as a research fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Foreign and International Social Law in Munich, Germany. Upon his return from Germany in 2006, he was employed as a deputy director at CICLAS. In the same year, the LLD degree in mercantile law was conferred upon him by the University of Johannesburg. Before his current position, which obviously was a past position, as Deputy Vice-Chancellor, academic, Professor Mpedi served as head of department. Practical business law in January 2011 to 2012, December 2012, Vice Dean January 2013 to December 2015, Director at CICLAS January 2009 to December 2015, and Executive Dean January 2016 to December 2020 at the Faculty of Law of the University of Johannesburg. He lectured labor law and social security law at the LLB level, postgraduate and certificate students, and has delivered numerous papers at numerous international and national conferences. Our speaker has published widely in the fields of social security and labor law, and his present and recent publication include a co-authored book of labor law in Ghana, 2022, displayed as we can all see. He is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you our speaker for today, Professor Mpedi.
Thank you so much, my brother, for that wonderful introduction. The Honorable Minister, I assume the Minister is here, but if he's not yet here, I'll acknowledge him in advance. Honorable Ignatius Bafo Aua, Minister of Employment, Labor, Relations and Pensions. The Chairman of Council of the UPSA, my dear brother, Vice-Chancellor, Professor Amati, the Registrar, Deans, Directors, members of the Judiciary, dear students, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is really great for me to be here addressing you on this exciting topic. At least for me, and I hope after this lecture it will also be exciting to you. I would like to start by thanking my dear brother for making this possible. When we talked about this, it sounded like a dream. And I want to tell you, in Professor Amati, you have a doer Vice-Chancellor. Since we talked about this, yes, let's give him a warm round of an applause. When we talked about this recently in Egypt as a possibility, in my head I thought, this will happen maybe 2024. And it didn't take, 4 weeks for us to already have this opportunity and the dates locked. Ladies and gentlemen, what do we mean by artificial reproductive technology? This, in a nutshell, is a process whereby the eggs are removed from ovaries of a woman and fertilized outside the woman's body using sperm in a laboratory. These eggs are surgically removed, ladies and gentlemen, for purpose of this being fertilized and then put back in a woman, of course, for the embryo to develop. It could be the woman that provided those eggs, but it could be another woman. Somebody asked, what are the examples of this technology? There are 4 most well-known examples of this artificial reproductive technology. The first one, which is commonly known, is in vitro fertilization. The second one, ladies and gentlemen, is called intrafallopian transfer. Another one is called sperm injection. And the last one, which has really made international headlines in recent times, is the so-called frozen embryo transfer. Now, it may sound weird, frozen embryo. Yes, embryos are frozen, ladies and gentlemen, and such embryos can exist in a laboratory in a frozen state for over 30 years. Earlier on, I indicated that this made headlines. There's a story in the US where the mother that gave birth to these children was 3 years old when these embryos were frozen. And healthy babies were born from these frozen embryos that were adopted. So already at this stage, I would like to mention why I find this quite interesting and why I find it important for me to share these few ideas with you. It is because very little is said and known about this artificial reproductive technology. And there are legal and ethical questions that must be answered. And as long as very little is said or done about this artificial reproductive technology, ladies and gentlemen, it means that us on the African continent will be caught napping. The truth of the matter is that a lot is happening in this area. Now, earlier on, I talked about these 4 ways in which this artificial reproductive technology can take place. But for this to happen, there's a lot that is happening underneath that. I talked about sperm injection. There are people who donate sperm, ladies and gentlemen, on a daily basis that is used in these technologies. Of course, the aim is to provide those that cannot have children to have that opportunity to have children and raise children. But there are challenges because there are misuses, there are uses and misuses of this process. When I came with this idea, I didn't want to be insensitive, and I spoke to a few Ghanaians I know, including my postdoctoral research fellow, Dr. Coleman, present here today, about whether this is something that is happening in Ghana. And in the last 2 days, of course, he gave me his answer, said, yes, it's happening. Of course, many major cities, you find all these artificial reproductive technology centers where would-be parents can go and pay a lot of money for the opportunity to have a child or children. But in the last 2 days, I learned a lot more that in Ghana, especially young students, there are young students that donate sperm, some donate ovaries for a fee, and to assist in this technology. While there are uses, but there are also misuses. There is a recent case in the Netherlands where this man fathered over 500 children. 500 children, ladies and gentlemen. It went to a point where one of the ladies that benefited from his sperm, this lady decided that she would like to have children from one father. So the first child and the second child were born from the semen donated by this man. And when she discovered that he fathered over 500 children, she went straight to court for this man to stop. Actually, she sued this man. And he took a court order where the judge said to this gentleman that should you father additional children, you will be fined an equivalent of 2 million rands per child. And it's not only in the Netherlands. Recently, there were reports that he was in Kenya donating. So the risk there is that people could end up, these children could end up marrying their brothers and sisters without knowing. And the challenge is that many countries do not regulate this and put limits to prohibit or to prevent some of these, challenges that may arise where siblings marry each other without knowing that, they are related. It is said that one man can father technically 1 billion children, ladies and gentlemen, in his lifetime. Of course, you need to have many partners to father 1 billion children. But just 500 children throughout the world, there is a risk. Some jurisdictions already have got limits in terms of how much one can donate and under what circumstances. To the point that I wonder, those young students, they have their reasons for donating. If this is not regulated, how many of the children born of this process may end up, marrying their own siblings? This is one of those risks that one should highlight. Of course, as this technology evolves, there will be more challenges that I will touch on in this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you may wonder why this legal regulation is important and ethical considerations. The challenge is that in reality, technologies like this evolve at a faster rate to the point that legal regulation is slow to catch up. And sometimes what is considered ethical, today may be unethical tomorrow when people get to know about this. Take the first case or one of the first cases of artificial insemination, which happened in the US in the 1800s. The circumstances under which this happened is just incredible. What happened is there was this elderly gentleman who was married to a young wife, and the challenge is they couldn't conceive. And they went to see the doctor. The first thing that one does is to go and see the doctor. And the doctor realized that the challenge might be with this elderly gentleman because of his low sperm count. And this professor had 4 students, the doctor. And he chose one of the 4 male students that he considered to be the most handsome and got his semen to impregnate this lady. This lady probably didn't even know what was happening, and a healthy child was born. Of course, all the 4 students were made to sign a document that they will not disclose what happened. Of course, then very little was known about this. Is it ethical? Definitely it's unethical because you need consent. You need to understand what is being done and so on. As long as the doctors, the scientists push the boundaries of science, if our legislature doesn't catch up because maybe those that are supposed to enact these laws do not know where things stand, then we're going to have problems. And those who are at the forefront of science are going to do as they like to experiment, and we can't have that as a society, and for a variety of reasons, many I'll touch on. So ladies and gentlemen, in 1931, it's not so long ago, dystopian novelist Aldous Huxley wrote A Brave New World. The futuristic novel, ladies and gentlemen, opens in the fictional world, a world where citizens are artificially engineered through man-made wombs, and class divisions are based on intelligence, and labor is quintessential industrial age. A far-fetched notion in 1931. But developments in artificial intelligence, AI, have made artificially engineered humans a distinct possibility, ladies and gentlemen. In recent years, there has been remarkable progress in the field of reproductive technologies. These technologies include medical procedures used primarily to address infertility. We know in our cultures that infertility is such a challenging thing, it's such a stressful thing, particularly for women, because of how the society would look and treat a person that cannot conceive. It is indeed a painful thing that would-be parents need to go through and deal with. Ladies and gentlemen, the global assisted reproductive technology market size was valued in 2021 at $28.2 billion. $28.2 billion is a huge market. This market is expected to reach $42.5 billion by 2030. This is according to available research, ladies and gentlemen. In the African context, research suggests that our constantly and rapidly changing lifestyle is fundamentally impacting fertility. There are also other challenges where people delay, starting families because of the work pressures. They need to establish themselves in the labor market. But through these technologies, people can delay the so-called biological clock. In their youth, they can store, freeze, their semen, freeze their eggs for later use. It has emerged, ladies and gentlemen, that as a medical socio-cultural problem, of course, this is something that, as I indicated, it has got the medical issues, but it's also a cultural issue that has to be addressed. The continent, and now this is the African continent, has a higher prevalence of STIs, sexually transmitted diseases, and postpartum and post-abortion infections, which contribute to both the male and female infertility that lead to later on people requiring these technologies or to use this technology. At the core, ladies and gentlemen, infertility, in my humble opinion, is a human right issue that demands attention. Now, Huxley's work that I mentioned earlier emerged as a glance into the future, but need it be quite as terrifying as the book suggests. The world state in Huxley's novel was arguably devoid of a suitable ethical or legal framework. In the 21st century, ladies and gentlemen, what are the ethical implications of reframing our creation of humans? As we venture into our own brave new world, we must do so with the framework in place. We find ourselves in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, defined by great disruption to technology, industries, and society, which calls for changes to policy and our approaches. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are two broad factors to consider. How do we safeguard core legal values, such as equal treatment under the law, procedural fairness and due process, and adequate access to justice for all, for instance? And how do we adapt to these broad societal changes? At UNESCO's General Conference in 2021, member states adopted the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, the first set of global standards, with an emphasis on protecting and promoting human rights and human dignity. UNESCO referred to it as a global normative bedrock, allowing to build strong respect for the rule of law in the digital world. This could be considered as soft law, which is not legally binding, but emphasizes a set of values. However, ladies and gentlemen, it does serve as a guideline for a legal framework to be established. There are also key concerns in our own context. Infertility in Africa is impacted by epidemiological barriers, as there is a lack of data informing the burden of infertility, the need for reproductive technologies, and even access. Moreover, inequalities are starkly presented in conversations around access, both from a geographical standpoint and a financial perspective. Those that have gone through these processes will tell you these are extremely expensive. This is not something that one can wake up and say, I want to do it. It's only those that have the resources that can really get access to this technology. There are also challenges in the cultural, religious, and societal perception of both infertility and its treatment, which are pervasive in many parts of Africa. And it's not only in Africa. I traveled in India, in the state of Gujarat, at a city called Ahmedabad. I found it quite interesting. Almost every building, the second building has got a sign, test tube babies done here. Imagine now a child is called test tube baby. I don't think that is appropriate. And this is things that we need to debate and deal with. Ladies and gentlemen, the point I made earlier about these challenges in the cultural, religious, and societal perception of both fertility, infertility, and its treatment are largely because of the impact of limited knowledge of the public. That's why it's important for us to talk about this. It's because of the limited knowledge, by the patients and even healthcare providers in some cases. Now, I was speaking about this topic to someone I know very well, who went through the process. She and her husband went through the process, and they were blessed with twins. Normally, when people go through this process, a number of eggs are fertilized and stored just in case. And as soon as they have children, many forget about those fertilized embryos that are stored, and they move on with their lives, which raises questions later on. Should people divorce? What are they going to do with those eggs or those fertilized embryos? In situations where people come from, the couple comes from different jurisdictions, there are arguments about, is this property? Can the other party take this with to another jurisdiction and so on? These are topics and issues that will need to be resolved and people to understand and deal with, in an organized manner. Of course, the issues that I've raised, in terms of lack of knowledge, are coupled with restrictive health policies, which have to be challenged. Just this week, a case from the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa was, handed out and was covered in the media. I read about this yesterday, where a couple that is in a lesbian relationship, same-sex couple, they went through this process and they were blessed with a child. They challenged the South African Children's Act because the rights provided in the Children's Act do not acknowledge both, the couple in this relationship as parents. And the Constitutional Court struck down that section that it must be amended to provide rights to this couple as a couple, not to one person in this relationship. I'm not saying it should be done this way in Ghana, but these are questions that will arise going forward in terms of the concept of motherhood, which is changing, the concept of fatherhood or fatherlessness, because a person can make a conscious decision that through this technology, she will have children and doesn't need a father in their lives, and so on. And these are the issues that we'll need to deal with. As I said earlier, unfortunately, our laws tend to be reactive than proactive. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to make the argument to establish these frameworks, I will refer to three specific examples, namely artificial wombs, which is something that will be a reality. Already it's available there, although its use is still restricted. Gene editing and embryo donation or adoption. Now, artificial wombs, ladies and gentlemen, are devices that can grow a fetus outside the body of an organism to term. It can be done. Where a prospective parent can dial in and sing for the child growing up in an artificial womb. It's reality. It can be done, although it's limited, and we need to talk about this and prepare for this. This technology, ladies and gentlemen, is currently focused on transferring an organism from a subject into an artificial womb. Realistically, growing an organism completely in an artificial womb will not likely to be a reality for some time, but it's coming and it will happen, ladies and gentlemen. The World Health Organization reports that around 300,000 deaths happen due to pregnancy complications. And those who advocate for these artificial wombs, they say this will save lives. Additionally, premature neonates born earlier than 22 weeks have no hope of survival. So this technology certainly represents an exciting new frontier for pregnancy and for those seeking alternative routes to conception. Ectogenesis, the process of growing a fetus outside of a human body, could help those who cannot get pregnant. Provide solutions for redefined family units and could save the lives of premature babies. Those who advocate for this raise this type of arguments. There are certainly arguments, ladies and gentlemen, to be made for the process, and as many in the field will tell you, this will likely be as common as donors and surrogacy are today in the coming years. However, if this is to be an enduring reality, we must ask the difficult legal and ethical questions and perhaps begin to consider our responses now, ladies and gentlemen. Ethically, there are certain concerns that this technology goes against the very process of human procreation. For example, as we research further in the field and consider human subjects, does this technology satisfy the 4 principles of bioethics, namely autonomy, beneficence, normalificence, and justice? From a legal standpoint, currently there are limited ethical conditions and human embryos can only be grown for 14 days, ladies and gentlemen. The 14th day is the point at which a spherical embryo starts to form a body and when cells begin taking on characteristics. With more research and acceptance of this process, how will the law adapt? I'm looking at you, Dean. How will the law adapt? Are we ready to really talk to our legislatures to get ready for dealing with this? Firstly, pregnancy laws will need to be reformed, ladies and gentlemen. We also have to consider how we approach abortions, for instance. Could this technology be used to amend abortion laws, I ask? Additionally, countries will need to rethink their surrogacy law in the future. Social partners will need to debate the conditions of service. These conditions include leave from work for would-be parents to attend to or even bond with their unborn children growing in artificial wombs. Jessica Schultz argued in 2009 that the development of ectogenesis will increase rather than resolve the complexity of issues regarding reproductive rights and the legal status of an embryo or fetus. Another example of reproductive technologies to consider is gene editing, ladies and gentlemen, which allows for the alteration of DNA through removal, insertion, or replacement in the human genome with the potential to combat genetic disease or optimize health. This is not science fiction, it's happening. In May, there was a healthy child that was born in the UK. This child consists of genetic material from 3 people, 2 women and the father. What happened through the so-called mitochondrial donation therapy, they took some DNA, some genes from the egg of this other woman, replaced the genes from the egg of the mother, which were faulty, so to say, in inverted commas, so that the child should not have these genetic diseases, and the child is born and is doing well from what we read in May. The question that arises is, this other lady that contributed, genetic material, healthy genetic material, can she claim to be the mother of the child? She contributed only 1%, and this doesn't change the features of the nose and so on. It just addresses this problem that could have occurred if this child was born, they didn't remove the faulty gene in inverted commas. But it raises questions that judges one day will have to deal with. What are the rights of the person that contributed 1% to this child? I don't have all the answers today. I thought I should just highlight that. Already we have seen how gene editing can treat sickle cell disease effectively. As this technology becomes more entrenched, we have to keep in mind various ethical concerns, including humanity's ugly history of eugenics. We know what the Nazis did, wanting to have this perfect race. We know as parents we want what is best. What will happen if each parent that can afford, before the child is born, then the genes are edited so that you have the fastest child, the smartest child, and so on? What will happen to humanity? Ladies and gentlemen, in December 2018, the World Health Organization established a global multidisciplinary expert advisory committee to examine scientific, ethical, social, and legal challenges associated with human genome editing. The committee made a set of 9 recommendations, including the World Health Organization taking a distinct scientific and moral leadership stance by being open about the opportunities and challenges while acknowledging ethical concerns, an emphasis on international collaboration for effective governance and oversight, human genome editing registries that include reviewal and approval by a research ethics committee. Human genome editing research should only take place in jurisdictions with domestic policy and oversight mechanisms. Encouraging reporting illegal, unregistered, unethical, or unsafe research and other activities, determine intellectual property rights, create platforms for education, which is important, engagement and empowerment, create a set of officially endorsed and clearly defined ethical values and principles for use by the World Health Organization. And finally, periodical reviews of these recommendations should take place to keep up with the pace of technology. I want to ask you one thing. Where do you think we stand as Africa in as far as these nine principles are concerned? To date, I haven't found a single jurisdiction where they are debating these principles and making sure that these are covered in policies and legal regulatory frameworks. And it's something that we need to work on. This is a step in the right direction, I argue, ladies and gentlemen. However, our legislation also needs to respond accordingly. How do we tap into the benefits of gene editing without risking human rights? In the South African context, for instance, Powder et al. Argue that we approach germline editing based on principles derived from the Constitution. Currently, genetic editing is expected to comply with same laws and ethical requirements as all scientific research relating to human reproduction. However, the authors argue that principles such as regulation of the process, ensuring well-established standard of safety and efficacy, measures for allowances of non-therapeutic uses of germline editing, respect of the individual's reproductive autonomy, and equal access should guide new regulations. At least researchers have started talking about this. And this is a role that universities such as ours should now lead in these discussions. Similarly, ladies and gentlemen, embryo donation or adoption, the legal adoption of embryos that have been donated and frozen by families who have undergone in vitro fertilization, a technique in which an egg is removed from the woman's ovaries and fertilized with sperm in a laboratory, should also be considered. At the beginning, I've already indicated, mentioned the case in the US where the mother was 3 years old when the embryo was fertilized, which is really a crazy situation, which shows us these embryos can be stored for over 30 years. This represents a new frontier for adoption. Today, when we talk about adoption, we think of adopting a small child and so on. This takes things a step further, where you go and adopt embryos, getting the history of the parents and everything, and say we take these embryos and hope for the best. Of course, in this case, the organization that deals with this embryo adoption, it's a religious organization where they've got requirements. You must be a Christian family, you must have the means and so on. But it can be a wild west out there if there is no clear regulation. Do we have laws in our countries that deal with embryo adoption? Definitely South Africa, I haven't come across such an act. I don't know in Ghana if you have laws dealing with embryo adoption. But it's a reality that we need to deal with, ladies and gentlemen. There are some similarities between embryo adoption and infant adoption. There is an extensive matching process, as I indicated earlier, and a home study to ensure that the adoptive parents are suitable. There are some added benefits of embryo adoption that we need to note. The adoptive mothers carry and deliver their child, and do not rely on a birth mother to relinquish rights. This provides a greater sense of control over the process and gives the adopting parents legal rights prior to birth. The process, while still expensive, is cheaper than undergoing in vitro fertilization and finding or storing sperm and egg donors. Additionally, this provides a solution to thousands of frozen embryos that are preserved but will likely go unused. Because many would-be parents, as soon as they are blessed with children, they forget about those stored embryos that they could hang around, or they could be stored, let me put it this way, for 30 years. This of course also spurs conversations about when life begins. The pro-choice versus pro-life argument is often drawn upon in deciding what to do with these embryos. As some argue, destroying a frozen embryo is equivalent to death. The nuances of this argument are normally laden, yet embryos are also used in stem cell research, where this argument does not seem to hold as much weight amongst practitioners. There are also a host of challenges presented by this process. Before the process even begins, ladies and gentlemen, there is only about 80% survival rate when towing frozen embryos. Then there is no guarantee that embryo adoption will result in birth. The statistics suggest that there is only 35 chances of success. Adoptive parents may have to go through this process numerous times, possibly with different donors. Adoptive mothers additionally have to undergo medical procedures and fertility treatments, which can be invasive and in some cases traumatic. Moreover, in the United States, many of the centers that assist with embryo adoption only allow traditional family units to adopt embryos. In a setup like ours in South Africa, this could be challenged on being discriminatory. And the National Embryo Donation Center, for instance, requires couples to be a genetic male and a genetic female married for a minimum of 3 years, alluding to challenges of access and inequity. Yet, as we explore new frontiers for human reproduction, embryo adoption presents an intriguing alternative for would-be parents. In the context of Africa, these advancements offer hope and possibility and must be carefully considered. Kamal et al. Argued that we have to break down barriers and ensure that Africa is given a fair chance in this realm, even with our immense population growth. Yet, as we head towards these technologies, admittedly we are faced with more questions than answers. As other technologies of the 4IR have demonstrated, we need sound ethical frameworks. This will be the basis for our approach to regulation. This will require the legal fraternity to keep up with developments in this space and respond accordingly. While there are broad ethical frameworks in place, it is imperative that we get more specific as these technologies shift from theory to practice. Pepper and Slabbert state that legislation in its broadest sense should be seen as a permanent work in progress requiring ongoing review. This is how we continue to break barriers and explore the unknown ethically. What is apparent, ladies and gentlemen, is that as these technologies increasingly emerge, society needs to respond accordingly. Largely, legislation, as I pointed earlier, is largely reactive, and we need to change this. In the 4IR, however, there is an increasing argument for a proactive approach. If we have any hope of subverting Huxley's dark premonition of the future, if you will, then we must ensure that regulating AI is not a futile exercise. As the biologist and author of Daedalus J.B.S. Halden once poignantly wrote, we can foretell little of the future, save that the thing that has not been is the thing that shall be, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Let's clap one more time for him. Indeed, a very complex and evolving field. I think as I was listening, I was a bit scared where we're heading towards, but I think we can't ignore the benefits also, the ethical considerations that come with these technologies. I believe our parliamentarians here present, you will be ahead, you will be proactive in our considerations of legislation that will control this field. Thank you very much, Professor Letlhokwa. And I would like to acknowledge some personalities before we take our Q&A. The High Commissioner for Nigeria, Her Excellency Cecilia Etienne, Welcome. The Director of Public Prosecution, Madam Yvonne Atakra, Professor, thank you so much for honoring our invitation. I would also like to acknowledge Reverend Professor Emmanuel K. Labi, Chancellor and founder of Regent University College of Science and Technology. Dr. James Paul Preacher, who is representing Professor Bill Popolampo of the Central University. Sir, you are welcome. Nana Yawedi Apia, President from Regent University. Say warm welcome. Dr. Peter A. Redu, Dean the Faculty of Law at Wisconsin University. Sir, you are welcome. And I think we will acknowledge as we go along during the program. So this is a time for you to ask questions if you have any, or contributions if anyone has. I think this is a subject where your contribution and your questions. So if there are any, I will bring the mic to you and then you can take your turn. Any questions? Any contribution? Oh, there's one right there.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. In fact, as you started, I was asking myself, as a Muslim,
Yes.
and also as somebody who is a scholar in the religion, I was asking whether there are religious considerations when it comes to artificial reproductive technology. If you have actually considered that, what are we doing? Because I know from the Islamic perspective, artificial reproductive technology is still a problem that we are trying to address. I know the Catholics also are trying to look at that, but I don't know how, as an academic, whether you have thought of the religious aspects of artificial reproductive technology. Thank you.
May I respond? Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, the contribution. I wrote a lot in this area, and I'm working on a book that I hope it will come out hopefully in the new year. And the area that I have been avoiding is the religious side of this because of the sensitivity of these issues, you know, because I try not to offend people. But personally, I thought about it, you know. I thought about what does this mean? I mean, I think it's Genesis where it is said, is it the Lord? Now, I don't want to show my little understanding of the Bible, but we're said to, if you will give birth through great difficulty. You know the part, I'm trying to paraphrase and all this. And now if people use artificial wombs, are they going against the word, you know, of the good book? You know, I ask myself, and many other questions. And this, I say, is an opportunity, and I'm glad that you, as you indicated, you are engaging in this, and others are engaging in these issues to find, a position about this, you know, and how to take this forward. My own personal view is that today we are seeing a lot of developments that are used meaningfully to advance our beliefs and our Christian beliefs and worship and all that. During COVID lockdown, a lot of people worshipped virtually, which is not the standard way that under normal circumstances, because we like coming together under a roof and all that, but that was used effectively. And my own personal view is that with these technologies, even from a religious point of view, we may need to adjust with this and embrace them. Somebody argued that, the platforms that were used by the disciples and the Son of God, to address people those days, that we have today were not there. And today we've got social media where you can reach millions of people. So do we embrace this because it was not there available then, or do we embrace it and reach more people? It's something that we need to discuss and debate. But my view is that from a religious point of view, we need to look at this and see what is acceptable, what fits in within our principles and belief, and what is unacceptable. Because just like fire, this technology can be useful, but it can also be abused. Already questions of embryos that are left there frozen for 30 years. Is it acceptable? Does it sit well with one as a religious person? These are things that we need to look at. For example, in the case of embryo adoption, these facilities in the US that do this, many of them have got clear guidelines that for us, we will make this available for the following people who are married, men and husband and wife, men and women who have been married for 3 years, who are Christian. So they have drawn the line in the sense that this is how far we're prepared to go. And I think different religious denominations will need to sit and reflect on this, because ignoring this, and I know this is not what you're saying, will not be the answer. We need to debate this and engage. At some point, I hope to engage with our legislature, engage with different people from religious groups, so that we can debate this in a constructive manner and see what would be acceptable to take us forward, because this is with us at the moment. Thank you so much.
Kindly, there's a hand.
Good morning. Good to see you, Prof.
Yes.
It's been ages.
Yes.
My name is Ashimizo Afadame. I'm from Regent University. I'm a council member. I have a question to my friend and brother.
Yes.
In terms of sperm donation and egg donation, you've raised the point that it's possible to have a situation where siblings get married to each other. And I'm thinking that means we have to have a system of data collection and letting people also know where the sperm is coming from, and if you're a child of egg donation, you should also have that information. But how do we strike that with the right to privacy? Because on one hand, you want to protect the identity of the people who have donated the eggs or the sperm, but on the other hand, you want to safeguard other people from actually going to that same bank to get the same sperm. It could even now be a sister that could go get sperm from a father, or a daughter could go get sperm from a father in the future, not knowing that the father has saved the sperm years ago. So how do we strike that careful balance, particularly in an African context that, one, we don't have data, and our privacy laws are still very tricky? Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Ashmis. It's good to see you. It's been a long time since we last engaged. I'm so happy to see you. This is an important question that you're asking, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a balancing act, in terms of the rights of the donors, as we have indicated, but also the risk, and strike a middle ground. There are issues such as consent that could be built into this type of processes to ask, do you consent for us to do this? But one of the effective ways, which may not be in the privacy and consent space that can work to alleviate this risk, in my opinion, is to have a limit. If I go and donate today and then tomorrow, some countries work on live births from the donation up to like 7 children, and that's it. But if a man can tour the world, today I'm here, I'm donating, tomorrow I'm donating in Kenya, tomorrow I'm donating in all this place. Such people, like what the judge did in the Netherlands, to say, you father a child, per child, we are going to fine you an equivalent of 2 million rands. Then that is the only way to stop. But we don't have to wait until that. To be honest with you, when I hear that young students have been donating here in Accra for so many years, and Dr. Coleman told me, now I'm putting on the spot, that even when you were a student at Ghana Legon, there were young men that were donating, all the time, getting money for that. Of course, they had their reasons. But if you look at the age group and all that, if I was that age, I wouldn't marry in, I don't want to offend my host, but I wouldn't marry in Accra, at least, that people travel. Maybe I'll look for a wife in Nigeria, just to minimize the risk, because you could marry your own sister or brother. But do I blame the donor? I say the legislator, the people who should regulate this should really take keen interest in this and regulate these things and make sure that we don't have these possibilities, where we risk all these things. And it's not just about marrying a sibling. It's also genetic issues that may arise from that. So legal regulation is extremely important. One can use consent, in terms of how to manage these things and make sure that these things happen. It gets even more complicated when you go into posthumous conception, ladies and gentlemen, where a person can leave his sperm stored for years and in the will and say, look, I would like to father children, from my grave. It happened. Sometimes it's better if somebody has given the consent. But there are instances where grandparents in the world, they have a child who's brain dead, is the only son, and the doctor say, do we switch off this machine? And the grandmother say, no, the future grandmother, not before I have grandchildren. Before you switch off the machine, you can medically harvest semen from a brain dead man, store it. And it happened where the grandmother harvested, through the doctors of course, got a surrogate and got grandchildren. Now the guy didn't even give consent. So we need to bring all these issues and debate them. It gets even complicated when it goes now to inheritance. Those who benefited, now a child comes later on, lawyers will tell you that this child, as a biological child, has got the right to benefit from the estate of the deceased. It's even more complicated. But to answer your question, I think we need clear regulation. We need to have limitations. We need issues such as consent and balance the risk against, the rights and duties that others may have. I promise my answers will be shorter going forward.
Thank you. Please, I saw a hand. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Mpedi, for the powerful insight. My question is, how does the use of artificial reproductive technology undermine the importance of biological bonds and natural connection between parents and their offspring? Thank you very much.
Wow, that's a serious question. People say it's in the state of mind. Some say we should not confuse naturally, being the father in the sense, let's take fatherhood, in the sense that your genetic material was used to procreate, than the bond that develops between another person who raises the child. So it's a fine line. In terms of this womb, artificial wombs, people say, let me backtrack and say, naturally they say a child can hear the mother's voice while growing in the womb. And to make that bond, they say through these artificial wombs, a parent can call in and sing for the child in that womb so that the child can hear the voice of the mother. So there are all those things. The frozen embryo adoption, already using this technology, the embryo grows in the mother's body, and the mother gives birth to that child. Already there's this bonding. So it's something that can be addressed in terms of how the child is raised and how this thing is done. The biggest challenge is in a society like ours. I mentioned this example I saw in India where there are signs that say test tube babies. If the way in which that child was conceived is broadcast everywhere and other children, children can be mean, then it's like, oh, test tube baby and all that. Those are some of the things that could affect, the society about an adopted child, especially in Africa. Oh, that child was adopted and all that, as if it's something wrong. So we need to deal with those, educate people, because that could be bad for the child. Yeah. I hope I've answered you.
There was a hand.
Okay. Yeah. So, Prof.
Yes, sir.
Your view about the fatherless and motherhood in the emerging of current marital statuses.
Yeah.
What's your view?
Look, I'm a married man with a child. I believe in this strong setup where a father goes home and a mother comes home and we raise a child. But I do not see anything wrong with those that choose that is a she and a she raising a child. But I can tell you the concept of fatherhood is definitely changing. The concept of motherhood is definitely changing. You get women that have got enough means to say, I don't need a man in my life, but I want children. to raise a child. And they even get the semen of one man because they don't want semen of different fathers, and they raise the child. And it fits well, if you can think about it, in the African context, where we say it takes a village to raise a child, you know. And I did a thing recently. I lead a discussion as a Vice-Chancellor on men empowerment to deal with the challenges we are facing. We work with young men, staff, because today we see this gender-based violence and how people abuse women, and we try to educate young men and by leading by example. And we talked this year about fatherlessness. I lost my father at the age of 6, and sometimes I would see it, I wish my father was around, you know, to see me become Vice-Chancellor. When I got my doctorate, I wish my father was there. When I got married, I wished my father was there and say, son, I'm proud of you. And this, you know, I become emotional. And then one man raised his hand. He said, and I also acknowledged what other fathers did for me. Growing up at the village, you know, it was not like now. You'd go to court. You'd be jailed if you chastise another person's child. But when I grew up, and I'm sure many of you grew up under these circumstances, any father could discipline children. We grew up being disciplined by all the fathers in the village. My mother would call one neighbor father to discipline all of us. We even knew which father had a soft hand. When they called him, we said, oh. And another one we knew we were going to get it. And that raised us. My uncle would call me and say, son, this is not how you do it. And that raised me. When I talked about this, one man in the group said, look, he lost his dad 3 years ago and was in his 50s. And that father was useless. So I didn't lose much. So this concept, you know, it's something that I would say we need to rethink it, argue, debate it, and see what does that mean. I lost my father at a young age. Was I fatherless? But if you look at it in broad terms, the village raised me. Even today, I have people that I see as father figures. That we need to embrace that to have, you know, a well-functioning society and teach these young men in terms of being proper men that respect women and so on. Motherhood is no longer about who carried the child. It's also about who raised the child. My aunts, I see them as my mothers. In the African context, we see them as our mothers. And it's something that we can teach other nations as Africans.
All right, the last question. Oh, yes, please. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
So, as a criminal law practitioner,
yes,
my interest is in sanctions. And
yes,
we all know the place of sanctions in criminal jurisprudence. And here in Ghana, we hardly have any laws around artificial reproductive technology. I think the laws would have to be developed before we get to the place of sanctions. So I want to know in your studies whether they are sanctions, known sanctions for those who cross the boundaries. Of course, you gave the example of the person who was fined in the Netherlands, but are there any other sanctions for if we cross the boundaries? And for instance, what if in developing the embryos, editing the genes, you even want to add genes of animals, other species, to that of children. Perhaps they have features that can help human beings. So what about all those boundaries? And then here in Ghana, same-sex marriage, for instance, is illegal. Sodomy is illegal. And so can same-sex people then adopt? All these are things that we would have to think about, because we are not there yet at all, looking at all the things that are still criminalized in Ghana and in other African countries. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You're raising an important point of sanctions. In this case, this lady sued in court and said, look, this is a problem, and the court found in her favor. What we have seen happening is that mainly in malpractice situations, there's a case now in India where these parents went through this technology, this process, thinking they are conceiving a child using their own material. Later, I don't know how they found out, that the facility used another man's, another man's semen and all those things. And the children that were born, the mother carried, but it's not theirs. And they discovered this late. They sued the facility and they got some compensation. But in terms of in the criminal space, obviously matters such as legal ethics will have to come into place. The people who do this type of things could get into trouble. They could lose their licenses and so on. And from a criminal point of view, in cases such as those that you have mentioned that may be illegal, if people go through this, it could also expose them that they are in this type of a relationship that could lead to other sanctions. But one thing I can tell you, take South Africa, for example. There were times when same-sex relationships were illegal, and now they are not legal anymore. Societies change. But for us to be able to deal with these issues not on a piecemeal basis where people go to court and judge must decide, the best way is to adapt our laws to make provision for these matters, so that when they arise, then we have got clear legal frameworks. My problem with judges, and judges have to do their job. If a matter comes to them, a judge cannot say, I don't know, go home. They must adjudicate on the matter. And my problem with that is that it addresses the situation on a piecemeal basis. Whereas if there is clear legal regulation and so on in statute books, it's clear in terms of what will happen. So I foresee issues of legal ethics that could become problematic. I see existing laws being sort of bent and applied towards this type of situations to find a legal answer, which may not be ideal at all times. I hope I've answered you, and thanks for asking a question. I was getting worried that there's no lady that is asking questions today, and it's a problem.
The very last question, yes.
Yeah.
Gentleman
All right,
at the back.
thank you very much, Prof Mpedi.
Yeah.
I'm Nanaya Mwapongo, and you affectionately describe me as Mr. Horse.
Ah, yes. Where are you speaking from? I'm trying to find you.
On your left side from where you are standing.
Right
Oh,
there.
Mr. Ponko,
Yes.
okay. Yeah.
My question is, in Ghana, the Evidence Act says that a child is presumed to be a father from a union 300 days after celebration of marriage. So in a situation when spouses consent and the woman adopts sperms of another man, what will be the position of the spouse in the marriage? Is he legal father or biological father, when we know that DNA test is about 98.9% accurate? Thank you.
Well, that is an interesting one, Mr. Ponko. At least I learned something today, about this presumption. In a marriage, I mean, when these processes are done, normally the facility will bring both the husband and the wife, or the people who want to go through these, get counseling, fill in the relevant disclaimer forms and so on. Unless if that process is done without the knowledge of the husband, and that at the end, if it's discovered, it could lead to, it could be a ground for divorce, in my opinion. But if the father or the would-be father consents to this, then it will be their child. Just like the couple that adopted a frozen embryo. It was by agreement, both of them went through the process. So if I understood you correctly, I couldn't get the point of whether it's through consent of all the parties or if one is being lied to. And if it's a marriage, I would say that would be a good ground for divorce. And if it's a gap, then it might need some kind of legal regulation.
Hello? I think this is where we bring the end
We can talk after.
to the questions after the program. You can meet Prof.
Thank you so much.
All too soon. You say I'm running here, then no, not time.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Prof. And we will continue from here. Next is our book review. Unfortunately, the Minister of Employment, Labor Relations, and Pension had agreed to be here, but a higher call he had to attend to something very pressing at the presidency, and so he sends his apologies. In his place, our very Dean, Professor Prof Mpedi, will do us the book review, and then we will continue with the program. Let's welcome him.
Chairman of Council, Dr. Prof Mpedi, Vice-Chancellor, the Director of Public Prosecution. I didn't realize you were there, so don't prosecute me. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, from labor in childbirth to labor law, our speaker author is a man of labor. He seems to have a lot of experience and understanding of things that give birth to things. And today he has given birth to a book on labor law. I'm not going to do a formal review because of time, but I also have to do my best not to be a lawyer who speaks too much. So I'm going to be as short as possible by just giving you snapshots of what the book is about. Vice-Chancellor, it's important to understand the importance of labor in national life. And indeed, in many countries in Europe, one of the most important parties are usually called labor parties. The history of these explains the role the labor plays in national development. Yet, it is also a truism that labor is one of the least researched areas in Ghana's academic life. It is on that basis that the outcome of the academic enterprise of our Vice-Chancellor and Dr. Coleman stands tall today on our platform. This book is a good and a handy text for practitioners. It's a source book for industry and also the courts as well as the National Labour Commission. Having glanced through the book presents us such a good source material to understand labor law at a glance. Since its passage in 2003, the Labor Act of Ghana is one of the most controversial pieces of legislation. Controversial at least in one main respect, and that has to do with the fact that it is one legislation which is heavily abused. And since we are speaking on the campus of UPSC and therefore many of us are members of UTAC, I think we'll all agree that we hardly respect that 7-day rule that says after 7 days, whether agreed or not, go back to the classroom. UTAG is notorious, of which I'm a proud member, is notorious for not respecting that, and very often our failure to respect the Labor Act produces positive results for us. Therefore, the Americans will call that perverse incentive. There's a perverse incentive not to respect what otherwise is an obligation. This book clarifies key obligations of labor as far as the rule of law is concerned in Ghana. The book achieves two key things, which in my opinion are fundamental values for the book, and that is brevity and coverage at the same time. Shakespeare said brevity is the soul of wit, and that is to mean that it is the wise person who knows how to say a lot of things in a short passage. This book contains a lot, yet it is not particularly a dense material. So for students who would want to have it used, I think they will find it very attractive in the sense of gaining much in few words. Within the book is contained a number of topics, some of which I'll touch on very quickly. But reading the book, however, I realized that the authors did not particularly go into contested areas. And I'm saying contested areas in the sense of areas that are likely to be controversial or politically controversial. And so some of the issues were not necessarily framed in what we normally call the political economy arguments. As to, for example, why should government decide? Why should government regulate free enterprise? Why should government decide that you cannot go on strike beyond a certain period when the Constitution allows, for example, for freedom of expression? And so if I choose not to work. Why should government balance the economic interest of the country against the private expectations or private commercial expectations of people at work? Nonetheless, the book considers a number of key and important topics, such as the protection of employment. All of us employed need to understand the rules and regulations that govern our work as employees. Under what circumstances can your employment be terminated? Under what circumstances, what kinds of rights do we have as employees? What are our liabilities? What are the limitations on the employers? The issues of sexual harassment. For example, the Labor Act is the only legislation in Ghana that touches on sexual harassment. And therefore, while some may think that sexual harassment is criminal, sexual harassment is only a civil liability in Ghana. And so, and it's not only a civil liability in Ghana, but it's only protected in the context of employment. And so sexual harassment outside of employment ordinarily is not regulated. It is important to have access to a book like this to understand some of these topical issues. The book, for example, considers some of the key and important topics on industrial relations, so one of which I've just touched on the question of strikes and lockouts. There are other issues in industrial relations, such as the Tripartite Committee, relationships and arrangement in terms of labor relations with government, negotiations for wage and salary increments and improvements, among others. It is important, therefore, for all of us to have copies of this book, if for nothing at all, for the mere fact that we are all at the place of labor. We are either employees or employers. And even where we are employers, we often report to regulatory entities within the workspace. The National Labour Commission is a very powerful entity that sort of provides a judicial ambit or judicial arm for the statutory provisions contained in the Labour Act. It's therefore important to understand the role of the National Labour Commission, the role of other industrial relations bodies or entities which are not necessarily structured officially within statutes. The book also considers, as I mentioned, things like unlawful deductions from salary. I think this is an area that should be of interest to many people, whether employers can deduct things from our salary. But one thing that is of interest that you may want to also look at within the book is the fact that your employer can actually deduct things from your salary if your employer thinks that you have not worked or behaved up to a certain standard within the context of your work. And as I have the finance officer sitting here, I hope he doesn't start exercising the idea or thinking of the prospect of deducting salaries whenever I miss classes, because I'm not supposed, we are supposed to be, the book contains one of the discussions that the authors indulged in, which I found quite intriguing, is the discussion on what is called equal pay for equal work. And the authors were quick to point out the fact that the Ghanaian Constitution nor the statutes, neither the Ghanaian Constitution nor the statute sort of explains that or sort of expands on the meaning of that concept. But they very quickly borrowed from international practice to sort of explain how these concepts are applied at the international level. But if you take it on the face value, of course, the immediate explanation or the immediate understanding for that is equal pay for equal work, meaning there should be no discrimination on the basis of who is doing what when people are doing similar things with similar outcomes. But within that also maybe contain the fact that people will have to earn what they earn, and therefore you will have to work for it. On a campus or in the university environment, where sometimes non-attendance at lectures is punished at various levels, the question is whether we can have salary or emolument deductions for failure to do our work. But I think the converse is also true. The fact that we should be compensated beyond what we are entitled to when we work over and above what is expected of us. All in all, this book is a very important piece in terms of how it addresses the matters without beating about the bush. The reason why I particularly commend it to students lies in the fact that it speaks directly to the point. The sentences are short, the sentences are effective, and you do not have to spend a lot of time to gain a small piece of knowledge from extensive literature. I think that the writing clearly reflects the necessity of use, particularly within the context of academia. So while by no means the first, and I'm sure the last, of such material within the context of labor law, it is an impressive addition at the moment. And for all those students who are reading labor law, my students who are the law school, the UPSA law school who are here, I strongly recommend that you do procure copies. But I also tell you one thing. When I was a student back some years ago, And thinking I was wiser than everybody else, I'm sure many of you are thinking you are wiser than everybody else at this stage, I did not use my money to buy books because I knew that photocopies produced exactly the same thing as the book itself. And so when you photocopy a particular sentence, it doesn't change. And knowing that, and I see Dr. Oyinikunodi, who back in the days was a lecturer as well, I'm not sure if I photocopied any of your books, Chairman, but the truth of the matter is I photocopied a lot of books instead of buying those books. And I thought I was fooling the authors. I ended up fooling myself, and I'm particularly addressing the law students. And the reason is this: a lawyer's office does not have photocopies. A lawyer's office can only have the original books. Now, books get expensive over time. And so whenever you postpone your purchases of books, what you are doing is that you're going to spend much more money to buy the same book that you could have bought today. But even worse, because I used all my monies on photocopies and other books, and once I became a lawyer, I needed to have my own library, I needed a lot of money to buy a lot of books at the same time. It is an investment I've never forgotten and an experience I wish I knew better on back in the days. So I encourage you, while you can clandestinely photocopy this, or otherwise exploit its use and undermine the commercial returns of the authors, it is important to remember your own future. A lawyer is equivalent to his library, period. And if you do not have a library, you are not worth the name of being a lawyer. So start building your library today by buying the books piecemeal and incrementally, so that on that day when you are called to the bar, you do not have to do what I did, in respect of which I was not bold enough to tell my parents that all the monies that came, I had used it on photocopies. So I would like to once again thank the authors for spending time to come up with this book, which clearly reflects the currency of labor law, and the currency of labor law in the sense of labor law today. They have spoken to the cases, they have spoken to the text of the statute, they have spoken to international best practice, they have put all of them together in a compendium, usable and student-friendly, in a manner that can be helpful, especially within the context of an exam. But for practitioners too, you will find the book very instructive and very useful in the sense in which it is alive to the realities of modern-day labor law in Ghana today. It is not just a piece for an academic exercise or for students, but it is one that is very helpful, speaks to industrial relations at the top and practitioner level, and that all of us will find it very useful. So without saying much, I would like to commend the book, Labor Law in Ghana Today, by Prof, and I've been practicing the name for the time I was sitting down. So hopefully I do get it right this time. But I think Prof Letlhokwa, is that correct? Prof Letlhokwa, yes. George Mpedi, professor at the very highest level of academia in Africa, the University of Johannesburg, which I was privileged to visit, one of the most prestigious universities in Africa and South Africa, an impressive campus. For Prof to leave all he was doing and to produce this book tells you the passion with which he produced this and the connection he has with Ghana. So I commend Prof, and I do commend Dr. Coleman. Is Dr. Coleman here? Perhaps would like him to rise. Are you Dr. Coleman? Please rise so we know who you are. Yes, Prof and Dr. Coleman. For Prof and Dr. Coleman to expend much energy to produce this, and if you trust anything I've told you, it's a good book, I do commend its use to you, and I've been told I should also launch it. Is that correct?
You'll come.
We'll come back. Okay, so that's it. So at this stage, that's the review for which I especially commend the book for purposes of your procuring copies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Yes, please. Please, let's clap for him for the book review. We would like to invite the authors of the book, Prof, kindly come up, and Dr. Coleman, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Program Director. I will be brief. I've been talking the whole morning. I'm sure you're now tired of me. A lot of people were asking me, even this morning, that you're a South African. What's your business with labor law in Ghana? Even yesterday, some journalists asked me, but in a polite way, because it's a curious case where this South African decides to write about labor law in Ghana. Dr. Coleman, right next to me here, came as a student, exchange student, in 2017 when I was dean, and it was part of our friendship, with Ghana, to provide an opportunity to young Ghanaians to study with us. And I said to him, a minister came to South Africa, a doctor will return to Ghana or stay, it's your decision, but you can't leave if you are not a doctor. And he worked as my student assistant. So as a curious academic, we always talked about, our laws and compared, the difference. And this is the joy of people moving, within the continent. And one of the areas as an expert in labor law that we discussed was some of the gaps in the Ghanaian system. And one of the issues he raised with me was the lack of a recent authoritative book in the space and area of labor law. And we took on the challenge to produce this book, and here we are. And this is the last thing I would say before I hand over to him. I thank each and every one of you for making time to engage with us, particularly the Vice-Chancellor. Thank you so much, you and your team, for giving us this platform. We really appreciate it. So that is the background, and I thought with this batakari, I'll gain some acceptance. It's the second time I'm wearing it, and I'll wear it some more. So thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you very much, Prof Mpedi. I'd like to thank you and the University of Johannesburg for creating the platform for some of us to express ourselves from a scholarly standpoint. We know the project that is already on track and those that are yet to also be released. What I can promise the Ghanaian academic space is that there is more to come. A lot of academic literature in the Ghanaian context, in the legal fraternity, will come, and with God all things are possible. So thank you again, Prof. Thanks to UPSA for hosting this event, and we are hoping to come back to Ghana to engage more on other projects that we are working on and other projects that will come. Thank you again.
Let's appreciate them. It's not easy putting words together to write a book, so we appreciate you. Prof Abuchi, now it's time to come and launch the book. Let's welcome him.
So my task now is to launch the book. I'm honored to have the privilege of doing this in the stead of the Honorable Minister of Labor, who unfortunately is not here today. As I indicated, the book is worth its cover and content. And therefore, whatsoever things are good and worthy of praise, I think it's on these things that I ask you to think, and I commend this book. The book was published by LexisNexis, perhaps, or arguably, the most prestigious publishing house in Africa, arguably. Authored Professor Mpedi and Dr. Coleman, and the year of publication is copyright 2022. So without much ado, and with the permission of the council chair for UPSA, the Vice-Chancellor of UPSA, all other protocols observed, I would ask you to join me and to formally acknowledge that this book is deemed launched. It's not my book, so I can't, I just showed it to you. Prof, I think the two of you should come and hold it and pose for the cameras.
Congratulations one more time. The books will be available on sale, a copy for 400 Ghana cedis. And, oh, don't say, ooh. A lot went into producing it, you know. Prof will be there with Dr. Coleman at my right-hand side to sign a copy when you buy one. So please do go and get a copy for yourself after the program. Thank you very much. We will have the UPSA choir give us a song. Just one. Thank you very much, our special choir. Time for UPSA, a timeless tribute of faith and hope, by Professor Kofi Abuchi, read by Dr. Koyo Enimride, our registrar. Welcome him.
Thank you, Mrs. Loko. Before I begin the reading, Professor Mpedi has graciously indicated that there is a limited amount of this available, which is a subset of the book, and he would like to have those made available to some of our special invited guests some students, and he has also indicated that he will send a free downloadable version, which will be able to be given to those present here today. So thank you, Prof. Evergreen Knowledge by Professor Kofi Abochi. Professor Abochi wrote this when we were on a trip to South Africa. And so I think it's very appropriate that we read this today. Oh, UPSA, oh land of evergreen knowledge, fountain of cerebral industry, a community of faith bearers who wield the torch of ambition. For yours was a dream born in the sheets of limitation. For in your conception was belief in Ghana's transformation on the wheels of knowledge and training. As you stood firm in the sands of time, the sun has shone brighter in your later years. The new dawn has sprinkled dews of excellence on you, and in your preeminence you have outpaced all your peers. Be hailed in your glory as you march unperturbed in an uncertain world, lighting our path with your torch of knowledge. Thank you, Prof, for this poem. I think the lawyer who wrote the poem deserves a round of applause. Before I take my seat, I'd like to invite the Vice-Chancellor and the Chairman of Council, if he's here, to make a special presentation to Professor Mpedi. Professor Mpedi, would you join us? And I also would like to invite the Director of Public Prosecutions to please join us. Thank you.
Okay, so all too soon, the insightful public lecture has ended. I believe the conversation will continue in our vehicles, in our homes, on platforms about who is donating and what happens and how DNAs will be, changed and modified and all of that. The conversation will continue. And at UPSA, we will continue to provide the platform where issues that concerns us are discussed, and so that we all can make a difference in our country. Thank you very much for coming. We would like to acknowledge Mr. Felix Bonney, Head of Marketing, who is representing the MD of GAMI and GAMI. Her Excellency, thank you for honoring our invitation. For those we didn't mention, we haven't forgotten about you. Thank you for taking time off today to be here. The UPSA community, you are here. Thank you, and we appreciate you. Members of Convocation, the media, we would like to especially thank Multimedia for partnering us on this journey. Thank you so very much, and have a wonderful day. To our able Chairman of Council, he's always present. For every little thing in this university, we acknowledge you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. To Professor, as for the name, I'm trying so much to pronounce it. Forgive me. I won't attempt. Professor Mpedi, we thank you so much for choosing us. Thank you, and we look forward to having more engagement between our university and yours. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Thank you for a good job done. And have a wonderful day, all of you. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a good day. Thank you for coming. My name is Abba Loko. Someone asked that I didn't mention my name. Thank you very much. So Prof will be in the corner, and so get your monies ready. As he signs the book, you take your book away. Thank you very much. Give us a closing prayer before we leave. So Reverend Theophilus Tete, our chaplain, will give us the closing prayer.
Shall we please rise? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for a successful program. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the one that gave a strong presentation. We say your name be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.